NIMBYism, we call it, just not in my backyard. Everybody in this country agrees we need more housing, just not near them. And so this is what the problem is. In truth, it's an absence of leadership.
From coast to coast to coast. These are our stories. History, culture, politics, and more. This is the VCalla Show. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the VCalla Show. I'm Vincenzo Calla, creator of VCalla Productions, and today I'm excited to have with me the MP for Parry Sound Muskoka and conservative housing critic or housing shadow minister, Scott Aitchison. MP Aitchison, thank you for joining me today.
It's always great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Welcome back to the VCalla Show. Welcome back to my channel. I'm looking forward to having our discussion today. And before we started sort of on our discussion about housing and affordability, and I'm sure this will come up in this question, some of the MPs that I've been having on the last few episodes, just coming off the election, I just wanted to ask and give you a bit of an opportunity just to ask about what were you hearing at the doors? Maybe it's related, maybe it's unrelated, maybe it's within this conversation, but what were you hearing at the doors over the past few weeks and months?
Well, I probably a lot of the same things that my colleagues heard as well. Um, much of the same that we've been hearing for the last couple of years. A lot of frustration about the cost of living, the cost of groceries, the cost of housing, the cost of gasoline, all those kinds of things. I live in an area and I represent an area that is largely rural, and so it's a lot of smaller communities connected by rural routes, and people have to drive here. And there's an awful lot of people that have to drive bigger vehicles because they're, contractors or whatever. And so, I would always argue that the carbon tax was particularly punitive to people that live in rural communities and those among us who are probably the most vulnerable and don't make as much money. So those frustrations were very real. I would say that was augmented by concerns about Donald Trump and some of his commentary about you know tariffs and making Canada the 51st state and that kind of silliness. So I would say there was a lot of anxiety. It was a lot of tension in the air for sure.
Well, and that's definitely something that has come up in some of the most recent interviews that I've had, and just, that's the way that people have been talking about it was really dominated that way. But I think it's also important that you mentioned sort of the talk about the carbon tax and all that, because that all sort of ties into to what we're going to be talking about today, housing and affordability. And the reason I wanted to have you here today is because I know, when you ran for leader back a couple years ago, and I had a chance to visit one of your events and speak with you when you were in Barhaven in my community, and in the past few years as the housing critic, as the housing shadow minister, you've been a pretty strong voice on housing, and that is an issue that has only gotten stronger over time. So I just wanted to get a sense of where you're coming from, some of your thoughts, and as we get into the new parliament. Now, I want to go a bit background on this. So before you were a member of parliament, you were the mayor of Huntsville. So you've had a lot of time to deal with municipal affairs and housing and see some of that on the ground work there, and that brings you a little bit of insight to where you are now. So as the housing shadow minister, what do you bring from that experience? I know there's a lot of talk about, municipal zoning and, provincial affairs with housing. So on a federal level, what context do you bring from being the mayor?
Well, I certainly understand the municipal planning approvals process in Ontario, which is similar to probably most similar to BC, but those two provinces have a very similar system. But it is a similar system across the country, and so I understand things like official plans, official community plans, zoning bylaws, and then of course the process to make changes to those and the public meetings required. And much of that experience actually comes from before the time I was mayor. I chaired the Planning and Economic Development Committee at the regional level of Muskoka. As we have a two-tier municipal structure in Muskoka, and so I chaired that committee as well. And so um, having some understanding of how that process works, or in many cases doesn't work, is an important thing for I think any other level of government to understand, especially when people understand that the concept that time is money. So let's say you're going to go build a house. Let's say you want to build a house, and so you need to sever a piece of property. So you go to your local, municipal council, and you submit an application to, create a lot, whether that's through a severance or whatever it might be, and then you start the process. And that can take quite a long time because, of course, you have to justify what you want to do based on the municipality's official plan, their zoning bylaw. If you need to make a change to that, and so there's a planning staff that will review it and give their professional opinion, and then maybe it'll get to before a committee or a council for them to make a decision. That can take months and lots of money. And oftentimes, if it's a complicated application, like something bigger than just a single lot, you have to hire consultants to help you with that. And then it gets before, the council, and oftentimes they don't really want to make a decision because your neighbors are opposed to it. They don't like the idea of change or another lot or a subdivision or another building. And so they have a say. And so then, of course, lots of municipal councilors will say, well, maybe, these people are complaining about traffic. Maybe we should have them do a traffic study. Or, oh, maybe we should have them do, a shade study because, this building will create shade. Or maybe they need to do, so they delay the decision. And so on larger applications, particularly in the larger centers where this is really acute, and frankly, where the epicenter of the housing crisis exists, it can take up to 6 years to get a piece of property zoned and prepared to build on something that is exactly the same as what's next door. But because the people next door already live there, they have a say in what goes on next door. So, uh, and oftentimes, local councils are kind of afraid to, go against what people say they want or don't want, because of course the people who are already there, they vote. The people that don't live there yet, they don't get to vote. And so this is what happens. It's become a very politicized process. And it's not always, the reasons for people opposing things often have nothing to do with good planning policy, but it has everything to do with local politics and NIMBYism, we call it, just not in my backyard. Everybody in this country agrees we need more housing, just not near them. And so this is what the problem is. In truth, it's an absence of leadership. And so this is the process at the local level that I understand intimately and have dealt with for my entire career. And you can imagine the vested interests that exist here in Muskoka on waterfront properties, for example. People have invested, millions of dollars once they get onto the water, and of course they don't want anybody building next door to them because they're there now, so it shouldn't be anybody else. So this is the challenge we deal with, whether it's recreation properties or, you know, multi-unit buildings on major streets in Ottawa or Toronto or Vancouver, for example. So this is a problem. The process is expensive because of the time it takes and the reports and all the studies and all the extra things you have to do. But there's also local fees and charges. And this is another tool that municipalities have begun to use. It's a newer tool in the last sort of 30, 40 years, but it's something called development charges. And this is a concept where, you know, because we don't want to have to, pay for the cost of growth. People who already have their house want to keep their taxes as low as humanly possible. And of course, their local representatives at the council table want their vote. So they want to keep their taxes as low as humanly possible too. So we've come up with this concept called growth should pay for growth. And so the argument there is, Vincenzo, if you're going to build a new house, then, between you and all the other new homes that get built, we're probably going to need to widen the street past that subdivision. We might even need to upgrade the water pipe or the sewer pipe in the ground. And the people who are already there and using that pipe, it's argued, shouldn't have to contribute to the cost of upgrading that pipe just because you want a house. And so they make you pay for it. And so now what you have is a situation where oftentimes first-time home buyers or, people trying to downsize, for example, from the house they had where they raised their family in and they want to downsize to something smaller, they now have to pay thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to make sure that the existing homeowner doesn't have to pay anything towards the cost of that growth. So the right balance has not been struck. There's no question that there's a role to play for development charges to assist, But right now, there are too many municipalities that charge way too much. And you can imagine, if somebody like yourself is able to scrape together the down payment 5%, let's say you get 5% for your $1 million house. Imagine if you could buy $1 million house, Vincenzo. So you get your 5% down, and then you have to have the rest of the mortgage insured by Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. And so with 5% down, that means that a huge chunk of your mortgage is not just the house. A huge chunk of the mortgage that you're going to pay for 25 or 30 years is actually government taxes, charges, and fees. On average, about 20% of the cost of every single new home in this country is government taxes, development charges, fees. So now imagine not only making you pay for the cost to widen that street one day completely, now you got to pay for it for 25 or 30 years, which means you're not just paying, you know, $100,000 for your development charges. You're paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for your development charges because you're paying for them year after year after year after year on your mortgage. I think that's immoral, and we shouldn't be doing that. And so this is the imbalance that we have come to in this country, all across the larger centers, particularly, where we have decided that, growth should pay for growth. And, people don't like change, so they oppose change. And this is the situation we're in now.
And
Sorry,
that
that was a long-winded answer to tell you why I understand the process.
Well, no, and that you answered my next question within that as well, which is great. Which was just sort of to and thank you for bringing that context because I feel like that is a really, we always a lot of people hear about the difficulties around municipal zoning and why are things stuck at City Hall, but that provides a lot of the important context in Ontario, but I think a lot for a lot of different municipalities across this country. And you sort of answered my question that I was going to go into, sort of about the role of the federal government. I saw a lot of during the campaign. Pierre Poilievre brought forward, and this was something that you've been talking about for years about cutting some of those fees beforehand,
Yeah.
and cutting the GST on housing. And sort of, I guess, before we go into talking about the different types of housing, I guess I would just, or I'll combine it with my next question. How do you see the role of the federal government, in helping assist going forward, building more houses and different types of houses, encouraging the building of purpose-built rentals or duplexes or high density apartments in different non-traditional areas. How do you see the role of the federal government within this very down in the weeds municipal system in encouraging that to happen to speed things up?
Yeah, that's a great question. Housing is complicated, and so the answer to your question is complicated because lots of people on social media will try to tell me, "Oh, housing is a provincial responsibility. Shut up and mind your own business." Um, and that's not entirely true, right? The fact of the matter is, housing is kind of a responsibility of every level of government, and so the federal government's role in this starts with fiscal policy and banking policy. Banks are regulated by the federal government. And so how they treat their customers, how they approach, financing projects, that's dealt with by the federal government. Fiscal policy is important as well. If deficits and debt get too big at the federal level, that impacts your ability to borrow, Vincenzo. So it makes it more expensive. And so we need to manage the fiscal situation in this country. We need to make sure our economy is working effectively. And so that's an important part of the federal government role in housing. But the other part that they are involved in too is encouraging local municipalities to speed up the process. Now, the federal government can do that city by city by city, which is maybe not that efficient. But in our system, constitutionally, the cities are not an independent, separate level of government. They are under provinces, right? So cities exist because of provincial legislation. And so everything they do is governed by the province. So the provinces in this country all have complete authority over how municipal governments work and how the planning process works. So in Ontario, as an example, the Planning Act is what governs all municipal planning processes. And so the province could and is making some sweeping changes to how this process works. So the federal government can work with municipalities with money. We often, at the federal level, transfer infrastructure dollars to municipal governments to help them pay for things like sewer pipes that, local politicians don't want to charge too much tax for. And they're not sexy. Nobody wants to cut a ribbon on a sewer pipe, right? Like it's not a, the local politicians like to cut ribbons on new hockey rinks and new splash pads and things like that. Not water and sewer pipes, all underground. So we help with things like that. But we also partner with the provinces to make sure that, we're all working together, heading in the same direction. And so this is one of those areas where the federal government has a lot of influence when it comes to spending. And so how the federal government doles out federal tax dollars to municipalities is very important. And so I'll give you an example. The federal government, well, the last government came up with this housing accelerator fund. This was one of these, it was a $4.5 billion fund, and they were going to give this money to municipalities over a course of 4 years. And they all had to make applications to this fund, and it could be used for all kinds of different things, but the objective was to speed up the process of getting more homes built. And so, one of the things they forgot to put in this criteria they had was that municipalities shouldn't make the cost of building more expensive. So I use the example all the time of the city of Toronto, which was awarded $478 million. And right after the ink was dry on their deal, they increased their development charges by 40%. Now, I don't know about you, but when you increase the local charges and fees by that kind of money, it's probably going to slow down construction a little bit. But there was no criteria in the federal government's housing accelerator fund to say you got to keep the cost of housing down. And when I challenged the minister on that, he's, oh, we have another fund for that. And I'm like, well, this should be an all hands on deck. It's literally a crisis, Vincenzo. I mean, I don't need to tell you that. Your generation feels particularly punished by a system that has made housing almost impossible for you to own. So this is the
Yeah.
problem. We got a federal government that seems to not really get it. We got municipal governments that just cry poor all the time and say they can't afford it. And we got provincial governments that, are sort of starting to catch on and realize that they need to change the rules. But, provincial politicians are, afraid of the NIMBYs as well. So we need everybody heading in the same direction, and we need the federal government to use its spending power and its fiscal power to make sure that the economy is running really well and that we're investing tax dollars really well to make sure we are actually speeding up the process and getting the infrastructure built as well.
And I think that is really important. And you keep coming into what's going to be my next question, which a lot of young people my age, a little older, a lot of younger millennials, many millennials, and then people sort of Gen Z my age that we're sort of going through university right now. We're a couple years away from the time we should be looking into this sort of thing. We've lost hope. A lot of us have lost hope. And that is why a lot of young people voted conservative in this election. We saw a really big shift in this election on all levels, but a lot of young people voted conservative for that reason. So what would you say, especially now, and I'll sort of bring in the next question, which sort of is we're in a minority situation again, like the past few elections, and strong conservative caucus, you have a strong voice, stronger than a lot of the other past conservative caucuses with about 20 more seats. What's your message to young people that voted conservative, and what would you say to them, to the people that trusted you, that you're going to bring forward their voices in maybe working with the federal government or bringing forward some of their voices and their hopes?
Yeah, that's a great question, and thank you for asking it. And what I would say to that young generation, that group of people who voted for us because of the hopeful message that we had on housing, particularly, and that Pierre shared, is don't lose hope. We are actually making some progress on this file. I would note that Doug Ford in Ontario has, got some legislation now that will dramatically improve the planning process. Is it perfect? No, but it's a heck of a long way in the right direction. I would also say that with our larger caucus, we are, I think, doing a great job of actually holding the new government's feet to the fire. Uh, I would say that we've been cooperative with them when it makes sense to be cooperative, which is, I think, a very healthy way for our opposition to work. Certainly encourage the government to get major projects done, and we made some amendments to their bill to, limit the scope of it to infrastructure. I would say as well that I think that Prime Minister Carney certainly understands the macroeconomic issues around housing, but he's also receptive when I've challenged him on a couple of the ideas that came out in their policy. So I'll give you one example. One of the things that they talk about doing now is creating a federal housing agency called the Build Canada Homes Agency, and this effectively would be a developer, you know, plan subdivisions and get more homes built. And they really want to encourage the construction of using more modular and panelized techniques, that kind of stuff. And so I really discourage the federal government from doing that because, building a bureaucracy in Ottawa takes time and it's slow and it's expensive. And nobody builds better than builders. They know what they're doing. We need to clear the path for builders, get out of their way, make the process faster. The federal government getting involved in this process, just because they're involved, doesn't mean municipalities are just going to, roll over and play dead and let them do whatever they want. That bureaucracy can run into the exact same problems, and we're not building any homes any faster. The other issue, of course, is that this would be the third federal housing agency. People tell me the federal government's not responsible for housing. Well, they have the CMHC. They want to build this other thing called Canada Builds Homes or whatever. But they also have something called the Canada Lands Company, which is an agency that was created when they privatized Canadian National Railways, and it just owned the CN Tower and the Port of Montreal and a few things. But in recent years, they've become a substantial developer of federal lands. So Downsview Park in Toronto is a good example of a major redevelopment. They've taken an old air base and they've built thousands of units there. They've got a couple of projects underway in Ottawa already. Um, but the problems they face are the same as any other developer. Number one, if you're using federal lands, it takes almost 10 years for the federal government to dispose of property, which is insane. Properties will sit vacant or, crumbling for years while they decide they don't need it. I have to ask everybody, it seems. So it takes too long. And then they get through the municipal planning approvals process, and that takes years. And so it can take them up to 10 years or 15 years to just to get a shovel in the ground. And so I said to the Prime Minister and the Minister of Housing, why would you create a third federal housing agency to become a land developer when you already own one? And it's a crown corporation that actually delivers a profit to the federal treasury. That makes no sense. And I hope that the government gets that. That the crisis is now. There's no time to build more bureaucracy. Use the tools you've got, and then get out of the way of the private sector so that we can get things built. And so I think that they might be receptive to some of those ideas, and we can actually get homes built faster. Um, and the idea of modular homes and panelization, we're not talking about, trailer parks here. We're talking about, a system that was used back after the war. There was a major housing crisis when people were returning from war and the baby boom generation. And so we used factory built homes back then and solved the problem all across North America. So really, in many ways, we can do that again. We can build homes so fast it'll make your head spin, Vincenzo. The problem is making sure we have a place to put those homes. And that continues to be the problem with big cities and the municipal approvals process.
Well, and that is a great response. I want to thank you for that and for our discussion. I know we're running a little low on time, so I just wanted to just thank you for this discussion. I really enjoyed it. And I'm sure a lot of my viewers, as you know, and as many people watching this know, a lot of my viewers are young people from across Canada. So this discussion, I'm sure, is very helpful to them, and especially as you head into the fall sitting in a couple of months, and sort of the first, the past few weeks you've had a small sitting, but sort of the first really big substantive sitting in quite a while. I'm sure this will be coming up and people will be watching. So I want to thank you for joining me, MP Aitchison. And on the VCalla show, I always like to give the last word to my guests. So last word to you.
Well, my last word would be thank you, Vincenzo, for doing what you do. I think it's great, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk about, frankly, a file that's not just work for me. It's a passion for me, and it has been since I was, a municipal councillor and a mayor. I care about housing. I think it's one of the most important issues we're facing in this country. It's foundational to our society and to our economy, and I just think it's absolutely imperative that everyone has the same opportunity that I had growing up. And I just want to, promise you that we will never stop fighting as a party and working to make sure that that opportunity is available to you and to an entire generation of Canadians that have been locked out.
Well, thank you for joining me. I appreciate your words, your discussion, and have a great summer. And I look forward to seeing what you get done in the fall and in the next couple of years. Vincenzo Calla here, VCalla Productions, signing out. So that's it for this video. Thanks for tuning in. If you like this conversation, you can find more just like this one by subscribing to VCalla Productions on YouTube, following at VC Productions 25 across all the social media platforms, and visiting vcallaproductions.ca, where you can also join my mailing list. So that is all for today's video, and I will catch you in the next one.